Hello and welcome to my podcast, Used to Be's Do Count, with me, Dean James. You're listening to episode number 7, I Used to Be a Lawyer. In this episode, I speak with Ange de Lumiere. Ange was a lawyer and she speaks really honestly about changing her career later on in life, moving from being a successful lawyer to being a spiritual lawyer and what that means.
A spiritual lawyer is someone who is connected to a higher intelligence. So I speak to people who are more grounded, who are more analytical, even logical, but who actually have experienced their intuition, don't know what to do with it.
Ange speaks about how difficult it was to reconcile her old self, who identified as a lawyer, with her new self, who is now exploring different ways to express herself through art, learning hypnotherapy and other tools, and how she struggled to marry the two.
So I was split in two, completely. I was like two people who I couldn't reconcile. And that was very hard, actually.
Are you ready? Let's dive right in. Ange de Lumiere. Beautiful name. Welcome to my podcast. Thank you so much for coming on to Used to Be's Do Count. How are you today?
I'm very good and thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be on your show. I'm a big fan already. I've listened to all the episodes and can't wait for the next ones.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. It makes such a difference when they get, well, I've got a few episodes in the bag now. You know, this was kind of at the start of my journey. So now the guests that are coming on got the flavor of the podcast. So I'm really glad that you are engaged and are a fan. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate you coming on to be a guest as well. Just for those of you who don't know you, Ange, just explain a little bit about what you're doing now.
Okay, so I'm mostly an online business mentor, working predominantly with people who are coaches to help them define their niche, understand exactly what their message is. But I do that with a slightly different angle than other business mentors in that I bring into what I do a lot of information about how to use your intuition to make smart decisions in business. Because there's so much data available, and to be able to sift through all of this and to make the right decisions in business, I believe, it's only my belief, that intuition is paramount to navigate that. So in a nutshell, that's what I do.
Yeah. Wow. It's really interesting. I want to ask some questions about that, and we are definitely going to get to that, but we're going to focus most of the interview, as you know, on your used to be. So what was your used to be?
I used to be a lawyer.
Okay, so you used to be a lawyer. We kind of understand what you're doing now. So it is a little bit different. And we're going to explore why this is significant in your life. How long were you a lawyer for, by the way?
A good 15 years, if I don't count the student years, even though you're a lawyer the moment you start studying law. So I suppose I should add 5 years to that. 20, let's do 20.
20 years, yeah. 15 years practicing,
yeah.
You know, but 5 years studying. When did you actually start studying law? So where were you in the world? How old were you?
Right. So I think I was about 18, although I'm not very good on years. And I was in Paris because I was born and raised in Paris, and I lived the first 36 years of my life. Take away Finland. Sorry, I should do that. In Paris.
Okay, so
speaking French, and with French-speaking parents as well.
Speaking French, and both French-speaking parents.
Yes.
So was there any English in your household at all?
I learned English from scratch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Through blood and sweat, as they say.
Oh, my goodness. You've got this beautiful French name, which makes perfect sense now, but also you've got a really good English accent. It's not just like a command of the language, but a great English accent as well.
Thank you. Apparently it's linked to musical ear, and I had that from a child. When my parents sent me to the south of France on a school holiday, I'd come back with the accent from the south of France, and everybody would make fun of me thinking I was doing it on purpose. I wasn't. I had listened to the accent for a couple of weeks, and already I was blending in. So I like to call myself a bit of a chameleon. That's why.
I'm a bit like that with accents as well. And I think that the musical ear makes perfect sense. So you grew up in Paris and you were around, let's say, 18, 19. What made you want to go into law, or what did you want to go into law? Was it your dream, your passion?
Definitely wasn't my dream. I didn't even want particularly to study law. And also I didn't know much about law. And I don't think many people know about law before they embark on a 3-year, 4-year. In France, the usual course is at least 4 years, if not 5. because it's not taught in school. And that's one of my bugbears. I think law should definitely be talked about in schools so people are aware, because the moment you're born, the law has an impact on you, sometimes even before you're born. And yet, it's like we're swimming in these waters, these legal waters, and nobody's told us what's going on.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I didn't ever think like that until you just said it. But law affects us before we were born and all through our lives.
Yes.
And actually, it is something that we could have some control over if we were in that world. We could potentially make a difference, but people were just not educated on what law is, the parameters around what can change.
Yeah, and it's so important to know the law because then you're in control, not of everything, but you can decide how to act with regards to the background, whereas sometimes people end up in situations because of their ignorance of the law that can be quite dramatic, really.
Yeah, but it wasn't your passion.
So no, it wasn't my passion at all. My passions were astronomy at the time.
Oh, okay.
And art, but also psychology. And in France, we don't have A-levels like you do in this country. I'm assuming people who are listening to your podcast are in the UK, or at least I'm going to address some of the population who's in the UK who have A-levels. But in France, you have 4 general direction that you can take when you're at the A-levels level. I was in the math section and I really wanted to be an astrophysicist, but I wanted also to get out of my parents' house as soon as possible. And I realized that to be an astrophysicist in France, I had to study for 10 years. And after that, I wasn't even sure I was going to get a job. So I decided to be pragmatic. So then I wanted to be a child psychologist. And my parents said, you can do better than that, which was a little bit dismissive, I think. But nevertheless, I was a people pleaser back then. So I listened to what they said. And then the third thing I wanted to do was art. And they said, you're never going to earn a living from it. So let's be realistic and pragmatic. So my mum took me to a career counselor sort of thing. She did lots of tests and she said, you'd be a great lawyer. And I thought, let's give it a try.
Okay, interesting. I think it's quite common for lots of people at that age to be influenced by their parents. But you did mention that you were a bit of a people pleaser. Were you a people pleaser around the family and outside of the family?
Just in every possible. And I think it stemmed from the fact that I was not a popular child. I was a misfit. I found it really hard to make friends. I do believe that actually I'm autistic, and that's probably one of the reasons. And at the time, none of this was recognized. And an introvert. So both of these things were talked about at the time. And so I overcompensated for it, for both my introversion and my awkwardness socially, by wanting to fit in, not wanting to stick out. And so I became almost like a yes woman.
A yes woman. So your first choice was?
Astrophysicist, yeah.
Astrophysicist, which 10 years and you really wanted to be out of the house. You wanted your own
as soon as possible.
At that time. Yeah. But then arts was a thing. Psychology was a thing. I think a lot of the time these things go hand in hand. Lots of artists and psychology are definitely, there's parallels there. But your parents said, you can do better.
Yeah.
And this career counselor sort of pushed you in the direction of saying you would be a fantastic lawyer. And that was it. Mind was made up. Okay, let's go with that.
And what she found, in France, you don't have an entry exam to get into university. At least back then, you didn't. But there was this special program that you would be doing a double degree in translation and law. And there was an entrance exam for the language side of things. And luckily, I was extremely good at languages. I learned Spanish when I was 9. Just by going to Spain in the summer for a month and total immersion. And then I learned most of the English that I know. That's not true. I've refined it since, but a lot of the English that I know, I've learned when I was 15 and I went to the US on an exchange for 2 months and total immersion again. And then I came back almost bilingual. Not quite, but
Wow,
fluent.
That's incredible. That's really incredible.
And that carried me through the language exam, whereas most of my peers in my program were linguists and they'd done the literature and language kind of thing, but I hadn't, no.
So there was a language and law going on simultaneously, which actually probably helps you a huge amount in your actual law career, I'm sure.
Yeah, it can really propel you onto the big scene if you're trilingual. and you're a lawyer. And actually, that's the reason why my first job when I finished uni was in one of the Magic Circle law firms in Paris, an English law firm.
So you've come out of university. What law did you go into?
Commercial law. And initially, in my first job in a law firm, I did property law, commercial property.
Okay, great. And you were working now for an English company in Paris?
Yeah.
A big firm?
Yeah, global firm. Yeah.
Global firm. How did you feel in that global firm? Did you feel happy that you'd bagged this job, proud of yourself?
I felt very happy. I was very excited. The environment was stimulating, interesting, and actually, I'm quite proud to say that one of my biggest jobs at the time was to help to support the expansion of Marks and Spencer's in the whole of France. At the time, they wanted to have shops all over France, so I negotiated all the leases and did all the work that was needed, and it was really good.
Incredible. I mean, that's really impactful work that you're doing, and you can see it. It's work that you can see. It's once you've kind of gone through that work and you see M&S grow as a brand, you kind of see that and you go, I've had a part of that. That can feel quite rewarding, no?
And what was fun as well is that when I left after 2 years, a very good friend of mine from uni who had joined the law firm was put on the task to unravel everything I'd done, because Marks and Spencer's decided to pull away from France and focus on the UK because they were having some difficulties financially. She said, "Oh my God, the job you've done is superb. It's so easy to undo all of this. It's so well drafted," and that kind of put a smile on my face, because you very rarely have that feedback on the return of what kind of job you've done.
Yeah, I think that's really important in any career, to get that feedback that you're doing well. Give me a flavour then. So you've already said about M&S, which was a huge project. Give me a flavour of the kind of stuff that you were doing in your career. Did you stay in that company for a long time?
No, I stayed 2 years in the law firm, and then I decided to go in-house. So there's two main careers you can have as a lawyer when you're a commercial lawyer. You can work in a law firm, in which case your clients are big companies, or you can work within the legal department of a big company or a small company, whoever. Or I suppose you could also create your own law firm on a smaller scale. So I joined the legal department of a massive company, but it was a small unit that was in charge of the international operations of that company. And that was super fun. Like, I traveled across almost everywhere in the world, except for Australia. I negotiated contracts with my boss. I got along with him famously. We went to South Africa. We went to South America because I was fluent in Spanish. I could also negotiate in Spanish. I went even to Brazil, where I learned a bit of Brazilian to try and get around, because I know that when you make the effort to learn a bit the language, people are so much more friendly, and and it's part of the negotiation to create that rapport with other people.
Well, you are a real asset to that company. I mean, you said that you were traveling quite a lot with your boss, so you had quite a close relationship with your boss.
Yeah, we got along very well. I mean, we'd stay for a couple of days locally and travel, do a bit of tourism. Yeah, these were very happy days.
Amazing. Let me just talk a little bit about your kind of identity at that point. You were a lawyer. You were traveling a lot with work. Your boss was a good friend of yours. You got along very well as a colleague. Traveling, you become closer bonded, I think, with colleagues. Your identity, your place in the world, you identified as a lawyer. You were happy and confident to say, I'm a lawyer, I'm a commercial lawyer, and this is who I am. Is that how you felt at that time?
Yes. And strangely enough, I don't think at the time I realized how much I identified with being a lawyer, because it'd never been my dream. It was just something I did. I knew it was something I was good at, but it was never my passion. And yet I loved it and I had a lot of fun. I don't know if you can, there's a nuance here that's maybe difficult to understand.
No, I totally understand it. I think you were being very successful in that career. You were having a really amazing time traveling, experiencing all of these cultures. You had colleagues that you got along with and you were making waves. So of course, being successful, there is an enjoyment there. Even though it wasn't your number one passion at the time, you were now making a success of it. So of course you're going to enjoy it.
Yeah, because out of hours, when I wasn't lawyer, I was an artist. First, I started writing a novel, and then I came into a writer's block. And because of that, I decided to pivot my creativity into mosaics, which I did. I was a mosaic artist for probably a good 15, 20 years. So I was a lawyer by day and I was an artist by night, basically, which is actually in a funny way what my dad did. My dad was a very talented artist whose father had told him, you can't feed your family with art. You're going to be a doctor. So there's a real parallel between my dad and I. But when he did his art on the weekend, it was exquisite and I loved him dearly for it. So that's what I started doing.
So we saw history almost repeat itself through these generations. And you saw...
Definitely a pattern.
Definitely a pattern. But you saw your father not turn away from his passion, but say, okay, I will be a doctor, but I have to do art on the side. There has to be an outlet. And you did the same.
Yeah.
Law has given you one thing, you're being successful, and I guess you're...
A good lifestyle as well.
Absolutely. A great lifestyle, and I guess challenging you in certain ways.
Intellectually, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, but not necessarily giving you that creative freedom, that artistic expression.
Or that's, as I like to call it, that soul food, right?
Yeah, the art fed your soul, right?
Absolutely. In ways that I can't even describe. In the writing as well. Yeah, you could say I wasn't courageous enough to be a full-time artist. I didn't know how.
Were you selling your art? Were you making money from it?
So I tried after I lost my job as a lawyer, and I never managed to make a living out of it, even though I do know my art is powerful. There's something very, very strong in there.
But being a commercially successful artist is so far beyond talent, isn't it? It's an industry. Cracking that industry is not just about talent. There's lots of starving artists that we know are incredibly talented and could be a commercial success, but commercial success is slightly different. So why did you stop law then? Take me into the feeling of you wanting to come away from law as a career.
So the first thing that started to become a bit difficult was when I had my first child, because I was married to a French man who was also a lawyer, who worked very long hours and who, rightly or wrongly, wasn't a lot involved in the raising of our children, more of a traditional role of so-called the provider, except we were both providers. So it was a bit backward. It was like, it's actually quite typical of very successful career women. Sometimes you have the job, but you have to do everything else that you used to do in the 50s, and it's all on you. So that's a bit where the situation I was in. Luckily, I had grandparents who could step in when I was traveling. But at the moment I came back, and regardless of the jet lag, I would have to go back full time into motherhood. And that was absolutely exhausting. Not only that, I also felt very bad for my son, my eldest son. When he was old enough to talk, he actually told me, Mom, I want you to stop traveling. So the first thing I did is to change from traveling to Japan, South America, and reduce it to Europe. But it was still very taxing because I had to wake up at 3:00 in the morning, was back at midnight, and then had to function normally the rest of the week. In addition to obviously all the, broken nights from being a mum, just that alone.
Yeah, there was definite gender roles being played here. There's definitely a thing that I don't understand because I'm not a mum, but mums will understand. There is pressure on mothers being of a generation where things have changed. There is still that stigma, but I think you're talking about old school values, old school gender roles that were still really prevalent in your life at that time.
And it's really strange because having lived in France and in the UK, I have a comparative. In France, it's almost a given that mums are going to get back to work after their child's born, whereas there's a lot more of mum at homes in the UK from what I've observed. So it was absolutely assumed I would get back to work. I didn't even think about being a mum at home.
And would you get a nanny? Is it normal to get a nanny in France?
So there's a lot more support financially for parents in France in terms of childcare. And it's a definite policy. There's a strategy there where you can deduce your childcare cost from your taxes.
That's great.
And so it encourages women to work and stay in the workplace, which I think is a positive. But I think France is more traditional in the sense that even for working women, it's still women who do most of the work.
As a mother, yeah. So that was difficult for you to find the balance. Did your work and your boss and your company at the time support the fact that you only wanted to travel around Europe and that you were a mother?
Yes. At the time, I had a new boss and he was a young father as well. Our kids were actually the same age. He was lovely and immediately he put me on Europe. We realized Europe was still too much. So then he actually created a job completely bespoke for me, which was a knowledge manager. I became the knowledge manager for the entire group of companies, which at the time spanned 17 different countries.
Wow. Amazing. But you could do that basically in France and not travel from your desk. So you were really valued and they carved a path for you that fitted your lifestyle as a mother.
That was probably out of the ordinary for the time, because we're looking at the early 2000 now. So that was quite progressive. Yeah, I was very lucky.
That's incredible to hear. But you still felt that you wanted to come away from law. How did that happen?
So something really interesting happened then, because the global company decided to create a special operator for a specific part of the business and pull all the different companies and create a subsidiary, let's say. And my boss was appointed as the head of that, and it was based in London. And he asked me to move along with him, which I did. Not with him privately, but to follow him in a job in the legal department in London.
As a boss.
Yes, as a boss. Let's be very, very clear about that. No.
There was no other shenanigans going on.
Nothing going on.
No. Let's just make that clear.
Yeah.
As a boss. So actually, his role moved to London.
Yeah.
He was now working to head up this subsidiary and he wanted you there with him.
Yeah, which was fantastic.
Well, how many kids did you have at that time?
2, and I was very happy to move because I wanted to leave my first husband. So it was an interesting exit strategy for me. He never found a job in London and he stayed in Paris, and that's how we separated, which was for the best.
Okay. So you really knew in your heart of hearts that you wanted to separate from your husband, and this was a perfect opportunity
to make it happen as smoothly as possible to start with. Yeah, put some distance.
But there was a real ending here, Ange. There was an ending to a relationship, a marriage. There was also an ending to life in France. There was an ending to your current job, your current office, all of that stuff. And there was a move to London. It was like a new place, a new start. You took your 2 kids with you, I'm guessing?
Yeah. And at the time they were 5 and 1. So that was quite something. Yeah. I was losing my entire support system as well. Grandparents, friends.
That's very brave. Did you know anyone in London?
I had 2 friends. I had my best friends from high school, and I had a friend from uni because I studied for 1 year in the UK as part of my degree, and I had made a friend there. So I had 2 friends in London.
So you did have a couple of friends in London. When you got to London, how did you feel in the world in this big city?
I loved it.
Did you? Yeah.
Absolutely loved it. Yeah. Because it gave me the excitement of Paris, but with the extra added, I'm traveling, but I'm not traveling. So feeling like I'm not home anymore. So it's exotic, it's interesting, it's stimulating, it's different. And at the same time, it's not that different from Paris. And I love big cities. So no, I loved it. My year in London, because I moved away from London after a year, was pure delight. And also, not being married anymore was amazing because my marriage wasn't that good, not just from the fact that I was the sole carer for my children almost, but other parts. And
there was a sense of freedom, right? That you felt a sense of freedom.
Yeah, total freedom. It was so good. And I was lucky that in the first 6 months after I moved, first my company paid for the move. They subsidized my rent in London. So I actually worked and lived 5 minutes from where I work.
And I am a Londoner. So where was this? Where did you live in London?
I know. In Marylebone. Can you imagine?
Oh, Marylebone. Lovely. Wow. Yes. Yeah. Very nice.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It was just a dream. It was a dream. I'd literally walk 5 minutes, drop my kids at the nursery, go to work, come back. And I loved that area of London. It's
great. I actually went to stage school in that area in Marylebone at Sylvia Young Theatre School. They've moved that school now, so they're not there. But I spent a lot of time in Marylebone, so I know it well. And it's a lovely part of London, some beautiful architecture and really buzzy and feels a little bit like central London, but it's not. It's like a bubble just outside of central London of its own vibe, its own thing going on.
Yes. St. Christopher's Place, you literally go from that quiet through and then you're in Oxford Street with the buzz and everything. I love that contrast as well.
Yes. Yeah. Love that. Okay. So you spent a year in London and you were very happy. You were managing being a single parent at that time, I'm guessing, with full-time work. Were you working full-time?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Yeah. But you were balancing that well and you were very happy. You had this new sense of freedom and then you moved away from London. So where did you go to?
So I moved to Bristol after a year.
Ah, okay.
And I'm still there.
Have a great city. And you're still in Bristol now. Great.
Yeah, I am. I still traveled a lot between Bristol and London because they had their whole training center for the UK operations in Bristol. And so doing my job from Bristol remotely and then visiting London once a week worked just as well as if I was in London and traveling to Bristol all the time. And so I managed to convince my boss, who had already created a job just for me, to allow me to keep my London salary, move to Bristol and just commute once a week. And that was another dream come true.
I mean, this particular company, this particular boss supported your lifestyle changes through that time, it sounds, which is really amazing, really rare sometimes actually that people experience that.
I agree. Especially in the legal world, I would say lawyers can be a little bit tough, especially international lawyers in law firms. So no, I was very, very lucky.
It's fantastic to hear. So how long were you in Bristol doing the same role that you were doing then?
So once I moved to Bristol, I kept my job for 2 to 3 years. But what happened is, just as Marks and Spencer's decided to pull away from France, my company decided to pull away from the UK after 2-3 years, and I didn't want to go back. And at the time, I was actually pregnant from a relationship that wasn't very stable. So I was a single mom, pregnant, and no intent to go back to Paris at all. So I went through a redundancy package or process because I was no longer wanted in the UK. But the thing is, by being made redundant, I didn't just lose my job, I lost my career. And I lost my career because I wasn't qualified to practice law in the UK.
Oh, interesting. Really?
Yeah, I wasn't. And even though I studied in the UK, I never took the exam to become a solicitor, and I would have had to do a conversion course. And at that stage, I had to make that decision, and I decided, no, I don't want to go back for a year, 2, 3. I don't know how long that would have taken me to become a solicitor. This is my opportunity to try something different, and that's what I did.
Okay, so there was almost a natural ending of law. You really didn't want to go back to France and you couldn't legally practice law until you did this transition course or whatever it is. I really didn't realize that happened. I mean, 5 years of studying, 15 years of a career, but no, you can't practice law here. You have to do some conversion course.
Yeah. And before Brexit, it was quite easy to do that, but it was still for me too much of I didn't have the motivation because it was more and more difficult for me to find fulfillment in the job that I was doing. Even though I loved the law, even as a knowledge manager, I was, getting people to work together. I was, getting lawyers from different cultures to work together, which is a huge challenge and an interesting one. There was something missing at that point. I wanted to make a difference in people's lives on another level.
Yeah, you were working with people at that time within a law capacity, but you were definitely working with people at that time and you felt that you wanted to make a bigger impact to people's lives. It was the people focus that was motivating you.
Exactly.
Okay. So how did that start to come to fruition?
So I received my redundancy package and I decided to train as a clinical hypnotherapist. And my motivation for doing that is that I was fascinated by hypnotherapy. I had read lots of books by hypnotists, as they're called, about past life regression. And I thought, I'm going to give this a try. The first year I studied listening skills because I wanted to become a counselor, which is something I wanted to do as a youngster. And then I realized it's 3 years of study. It's too long. So let's just do hypnotherapy. There was a brilliant school in Bristol that did a year long. So it was more serious than just the weekend little certificate that you get. And so I did that. I felt that I could make a difference with that.
Did that give you a bit of a new lease of life?
Yes, I absolutely enjoyed it. Took a lot of courage to move from Paris to London because I was losing my support system. And the person that helped me the most to make that decision was a psychic. I went to a psychic and I asked her, she was recommended by someone else. And I said, is the move to London going to be good for me? And she said, absolutely. Go for it. You will be so much happier in the UK than you were in France. Green light, happy ending. And she was right.
Okay. So were you seeing psychics before that point?
I think I had seen her a couple of times before, mostly because when I did my gap year in the UK, one of my best friends that I made when I was here was American and she was into psychics a lot and tarot and all that sort of stuff, which was completely new for me.
Okay, so you were kind of embracing this, that, psychics and tarot reading, and you'd seen this lady before who gave you the green light, and that really gave you the courage to move.
Yeah, yeah. But very shortly after I trained in hypnotherapy, I actually trained as a tarot reader as well.
I thought that was going to come next.
And as a healer as well.
That was on the cards.
It's almost good pun. Very good pun. It happened in a roundabout way, though, and a very interesting way, because at that point I had no intent to do that. But after a couple of months losing my job, I needed a sense of direction. So I decided to go for another psychic reading. And I found a recommendation in a little crystal shop, how it can happen. And I went to see this woman, and she started talking to me about my grandmother. She was a psychic medium. My grandmother had died the year I moved to the UK. So it was nice to hear from her. And it's at the end that she dropped a complete bomb. She saw something in me. She even pulled her husband into the session to observe me. It was like, what's wrong with me? I started wondering if my aura was dark or something, whatever. But it turned out that she wanted him to check something because she saw, in her words, I still don't believe it, but in her words, she said I had an angel dust coming out of my hands. And that was a bomb, because I was still a lawyer then. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this information? You're telling me I have angel dust coming out my hand. Get lost. I don't want to hear this. This is disturbing me. This is not helping. I don't know what to do. And it felt very spooky, actually.
So that made you feel uneasy?
Oh, definitely. I was so uncomfortable.
Did you know what she meant by it?
No, she just said that. That's it.
She didn't explain. It was kind of open for interpretation a little bit.
But she did do a course to train people in spiritual healing. So she said, you might want to try that. And so I went to her courses every week.
Okay. And you were engaged with that, really sort of feeling that was giving you something at that time?
So it was a mixed feeling, because on the one hand, I didn't believe anything that they were telling me. I just went along for the ride because I thought, if I have this gift, I'm supposed to use it. And on the other hand, I was just being curious. In a way, I'd given myself permission when I lost my job, which was shortly after that, to do all the things I've never allowed myself to do before. So I became a practicing artist and an exhibiting artist with my mosaics. I did the hypnotherapy thing. I started writing again as well. And I trained as a healer and as a tarot reader.
Hello, it's me again. I hope you're enjoying Ange's story as much as I enjoyed interviewing her. She's such an interesting lady with so much to offer the world, so much wisdom, so much experience, and I felt very lucky to actually sit her down and interview her. You might have realised that she mentioned about being a people pleaser. This affected Ange quite a lot, especially when she was a young person. If that connected at all with you, I want to remind you that you can go back and listen to episode number 6 with Amir Sadari, I Used to Be a People Pleaser. He explores the detrimental effect that had on his relationships and how he managed to stop those bad people-pleasing habits later on in life. So if that did hit a nerve, please go and listen to episode number 6. Let's dive back in and hear about how Ange developed from being a lawyer into a new career. There was a big transition from France to the UK, a big transition that took a lot of bravery. You embraced London, you loved London, and you found yourself a new life actually in Bristol long term, but you found yourself a new life in the UK. And then there was a definite ending when the subsidiary that you were working for pulled out of the UK, and there was a definite closed book there. There's like a loss of identity in those stages. But rather than dwelling on that, you seem resilient enough to just go, that's what I'm doing next. Because the way you're telling it makes me feel that. But was there any sort of shaky feelings or? So
what was really strange at the start is that when I lost my job as a lawyer and my whole career as a lawyer, I realized almost overnight how much I had identified with my job. And it's something that happened insidiously because I'd never really thought of myself as only a lawyer. I was an artist, I was a mum, I was this, that. It wasn't just my focus.
So when you stopped being a lawyer is when you realized I used to be a lawyer was actually more significant than you ever thought as an identity label, as a role in the world.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it was reinforced. It was reinforced because it's at that point that I realized that when you meet someone new, they always ask you what you do. And I had no answer at that point. And so I actually avoided going out and meeting new people because I just couldn't answer these basic questions that everybody throws at each other the moment they meet each other.
It's so true. People want to feel...
They want to put you in a box.
They want to put you in the box and they want to feel comfortable with who you are by asking, what do you do? And that draws some kind of conclusion to who you are as a person. We're all guilty of that, right? Oh, you're a lawyer. Okay. And then in your mind, you've kind of drawn a picture of who that person is. People do it all the time, knowingly or unknowingly, but you didn't have an answer for people at that time. How did that make you feel?
I felt very uncomfortable. I realized, and this is when I realized that my identity was so closely linked to what I was doing as a job. And I suspect that people who become unemployed for long periods of time, or maybe even mums who have children and who stop working but who had a career, would feel the same way, that they're isolated. And because of this automatic question that's been asked, you put in the spot. And if you can't answer it in a clear way and in a way that satisfies the other person, then you've lost them.
Absolutely, because they can't place you, they can't put you in a box, and that makes them feel uneasy. Again, knowingly or unknowingly, it makes social interactions a lot more difficult.
Absolutely. And I started isolating myself because of that.
Yeah, so there were definite endings to your career and your identity as a lawyer that we were talking about, and that made you isolated at that time. But you were finding, I guess, an outlet, an artistic, a creative outlet through your art, through your books, and you were learning new skills as well. So that was almost introducing you to the world in a completely different way, even as a different person.
Yes. In effect, I realized after 15 years of navigating that new world that I almost denied my identity as a lawyer in that new sphere, because the way that healers, artists, writers, and tarot readers look at lawyers is not very favorable. So I started not mentioning anymore that I used to be a lawyer, but I felt that I was cutting a part of myself out. And that's why I think your podcast is so amazing as a concept, is that it took me 15 years to reclaim the fullness of who I was, because I'm still a lawyer. And some law professors say as a joke, once a lawyer, always a lawyer. And I think they're right. It's a way of looking at things. There's a logic behind it. There's a factual research, and it's a frame of mind.
And there are so many transferable skills. Law is, like you said, a way of thinking, a frame of mind, a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at situations and reading situations. If you studied law and you practiced law for so long, I'm guessing your brain just works in that way. So denying that part of yourself must have been quite difficult. So I'm hearing you felt a little bit of shame around that.
I did. Yeah. And I also felt shame towards my friends who were still in the law or other lawyers, because what I did now was considered completely out there. So I was split in two completely. I was like two people who I couldn't reconcile. And that was very hard, actually.
If we explain, I guess I'm trying to find the words to explain law, but it's pragmatic, maybe is a good word. Traditional, it's objective. There is a lot of research and a lot of theory around it.
It's very analytical as well.
It's very analytical. It's almost grounded. I'm sort of imagining it's grounded, right?
Yeah.
This new thing that you were exploring, these new things of tarot reading and mediumship and hypnotherapy
and art.
This is definitely not grounded. It's the opposite. And art, this is subjective. This is exploration of human emotions. There's different interpretations around. It's about feeling. It's about intuition. So there's a definite opposition. You felt shame on both sides of that in your identity?
Yeah, almost like as you were moving your arms like this, I felt that yin and yang thing, that complete opposites in me, but I hadn't learned how to blend them.
Had to balance those.
And I think it took me 15 years. And then one day, one of my friends who used to live in London, who was a lawyer, tried to reintroduce me to the legal crowd that we were together with. And he said something like, "Oh, she's a psychic medium now." And I said, "No, I'm not." I had this big body reaction to the psychic medium label that I didn't want because I feel very uncomfortable. Even though I do mediumship, it's not something I feel comfortable with. And so in answer to what he said, I said, no, I'm not a psychic medium. I'm a spiritual lawyer. And at the time, I didn't even know what it meant. It was just two words that I put together that spurred out of my mouth. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to stick with that. Spiritual lawyer. It feels right.
I'm not a lawyer.
No.
And I'm not a psychic medium. I'm a spiritual lawyer.
Yeah.
You carved your own term, you carved your own path.
And it stuck.
But you didn't know at that time what that was. So have you discovered over time what that is for you?
Yes.
Okay, so what is that?
Absolutely.
What's a spiritual lawyer?
Absolutely. So I think a spiritual lawyer is someone who is connected to a higher intelligence, but who is still very grounded. And I work mostly with businesses and with people who are entrepreneurs. So I love that you said grounded for lawyer because that's my forte in a way, because I can come across and I can speak other people's language because I was a commercial lawyer and then I was an entrepreneur for years. So I speak to people who are more grounded, who are more analytical, even logical, but who actually have experienced their intuition, don't know what to do with it. And I help them be more balanced. Or instead of being if you were looking at the yin and yang and the black would be the lawyer and the white would be the psychic, to blend it into something that really works.
I love that. I love that because law or business, should we say, business and entrepreneurship is so analytical and you need to think in a certain way, but it doesn't take out any of the human part of our experience. And the human part of our experience, sometimes we can't put our finger on it or we can't explain it or we can't interpret it because it's so complex. We're just a world of complex emotions that are always changing and evolving, and we're trying to adapt and survive in this world around us, but also we're trying to run a business. So I totally get what you do. I totally understand what that means, and I totally understand the value of it to business owners, to entrepreneurs.
Oh, thank you. I mean, not everybody does. So I really appreciate that. And if you think about some of the most successful entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, they always talk about the intuition having been a guiding light in their business. But none of them know how to teach intuition to other people. Whereas in the 15 years that I've studied all forms of intuition, I mean, I've trained as an animal communicator. I've trained as a tarot reader. I've trained as a psychic medium. I've trained in all these different modalities because I wanted to crack the code of it. I liked to call it my PhD in intuition from the University of Life. And energy is a big part of it because most of what these people do, they read energy.
Communication, as we know, is 20% of what we say and 80% of not. We talk about body language and people's energy, and intuition, I guess, is really about understanding that in ourselves and in others. So this is something that you're teaching to people, right? This is something that you're training. How long have you been doing this now?
Since 2018 now. So 6 years of teaching, I would say, logical-minded people how to tap into their intuition and understand it. Because everybody has a different way to tap into their intuition. Everybody's intuition is different. But I'm talking also about people who are not psychic. It's important for people to understand because it's almost like there's two worlds. There's the psychics and then there's our intuition as, I would say, regular human beings. I don't want to sound too flippant when I say that.
No, and I think there's going to be people out there listening with their own beliefs in that. And so, that's fine. Whether you believe in psychic energy or if you want to call it that or not, it doesn't really matter. I think what you're talking about is energy, is non-verbal communication, is intuition, which we can all understand exactly what that is. We've all spoken about and thought about in our lives, intuition and gut feeling and these things. And you're doing that in a business setting. So you're working in a business context. Are you working with individuals or groups of individuals?
So at the moment, it's individuals, but it might change. Because I've had some interest of me coming into companies to teach how to use intuition in everyday business, mostly in the context of decision making.
And you're running courses in that area, right?
Yeah. So I have an online course that people can look at, but I prefer to teach one-to-one. I have like VIP packages because everybody's so different and it takes a long time to trust your intuition. So sometimes what I do is I'm almost like your co-pilot for a while so that I can validate what you're getting through what I'm teaching you until you feel completely confident to drive the car on your own. I'm like a driving instructor for intuition, basically.
I love that. I love that analogy. And again, it makes perfect sense. I mean, how many times can I say I have gone against my intuition in my life? So many times, because you doubt yourself. Doubt creeps in all the time. You have this feeling, a feeling that is unexplainable, really.
Or irrational.
Or an irrational feeling. And then you go against that feeling somehow. You go against that intuitive thought or feeling that you have because of maybe practicalities or something else leads you down another road. So it makes sense to have somebody helping you drive that car and understand how you respond to those feelings, really. It's scary. It's scary because we're told so much. So it's quite easy for us to just go with what we're told. But sometimes our intuition goes against what we're told. And that's where it becomes difficult.
As children, we have amazing intuitive skills that is literally drummed out of us through education. Now, I'm not saying education is the wrong thing, but I think I would love for education to be able to preserve that. And that's one of my biggest missions, is to teach intuition all the way from primary school to that this would be on the curriculum in some way or another, because it's the best protection you can have generally in life. I might or might have told you that I wrote a memoir called Spiritual Lawyer, which is not published yet, but in the process of coming out probably early January 2025. And in it, the first chapter is about how I escaped a bombing, a pretty devastating bombing in Paris in 1987, thanks to my intuition. But I had no idea that it was my intuition that protected me. I had no idea. So I was doing an internship as a lawyer in the legal department, was still a student, probably year 2 or 3. And I've always lived on Rive Gauche, and I don't know if you're in Paris a little bit. And one of my favorite shops in Paris, in Montparnasse, is La Fnac, which is a temple to books and music. And this is my shopping place. So I decided after my day at the law firm, at the legal department, to go and shop there. And when I was in the metro, literally at Montparnasse, when I was supposed to go out and walk down the Rue de Rennes to go to the Fnac, I changed my mind and went home instead. And this was so unusual for me. I'm a person that's usually reliable, or at the time anyway. Now I use my intuition a lot more, so I follow these nudges because this one literally just saved my life. By the time I got out at Raspail, which was my stop, emergency vehicles zooming down, ambulances, police, firemen. It felt like a war zone. And actually, literally on the TV later that day, I found out that 7 people were killed, 55 were injured by a massive bomb that was placed in front of La Fnac at exactly the time I would have walked past had I gone there. At the time, I went into denial. I was like, this is not important. But I felt so guilty. I was like, why is it that I avoided it and these people didn't? And I think this actually opened up my spiritual quest, so to speak, or wanting to find answers that I couldn't find anywhere else. My dad's best friend was a priest. And we used to get into all these conversations from when I was very young because he was always around. And he could not answer me. He could not give me satisfactory answers. And so I went on this quest, and it was through books that I bought online that I started, which is also why I was curious to train in hypnotherapy, because I'd found all these books about past life regression, life between lives, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh my God, if I'm a clinical hypnotherapist, I could actually do that. But that was my intuition. My intuition saved me, but I didn't know that it was.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? When you look back at a situation like that happened and you think it's a real sliding doors moment and you go, why? Why did I turn away? I wanted to go to the Fnac. That's my favorite shop in the world. But why at that moment I said, no, I'm just going to go home right now.
I felt it actually was a feeling in my body of extreme tiredness, instant. And this was my intuition creating that feeling in me so that I wouldn't go where I suppose you could say I wasn't supposed to go. But it still didn't give me the answers. And I still didn't understand that intuition could speak in that way. Now, of course, now that I've studied intuition for more than 15 years, I could explain to you how energetically, how it worked and exactly all the mechanism.
So now you have managed to fuse these two worlds that we were talking about, and you're using your strength and your experience from both of those worlds to teach other people about intuition and how to use that in a successful way in business. It sounds like you've really found a balance. You found this balance between these two worlds, and you've managed to sort of pull the two together in a really successful way. How do you identify now, going back to those social situations, if somebody said, "Hi, Ange, nice to meet you. What do you do?" What do you say?
Well, now I say I'm a spiritual lawyer. And nobody knows what it is. And it starts a wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. It opens up the door to explore what that is and allow people to understand a little bit better. And you mentioned that you've got a book coming out called The Spiritual Lawyer. How far away is that from being published, would you say?
So I'm in my last edit. So just the polishing of it. I haven't a date for the release, but it makes me think that I could easily launch it in January, something like that. I don't want to put too much pressure on myself, but I've written books before.
So you are an author. You are a published author. You are a spiritual lawyer. We know that you're practicing that now. What else are you doing at the moment?
I'm a podcaster as well.
And you're a podcaster. I wondered why you were so good at talking.
So I have two podcasts. One is called The Intuitive Revolution in Business, which makes complete sense with what we discussed, which I sort of shelved about 2 years ago, but I'm actually going to pick it up again. Because it's really dear to my heart. And in the meantime, I started another podcast called True Spirituality with Ange, which ties in more with my book than what I do in my business, if that makes sense. But I want to keep both of them alive because I care about spirituality in business.
So the Intuitive Revolution in Business, just give us a flavor of what that is and what that podcast is about.
So what I've decided is to talk to business people about intuition, explain to them the value of it, what it looks like. I used to have a signature 5-day challenge to teach people how to trust their intuition, not to learn how to be intuitive, because we're all intuitive. It's just that we don't trust it. So I have like a really structured process that's become an online course for people who want to do it. And the reason why I've decided to start it again is because I'm just about to start my public speaking path. Let's call it a path at this point. I've done loads of podcast interviews. I've done lots of things online, but now I want to do it in person. So I'm learning to get on stage and talk. And I know that my intuition helps me to be an amazing speaker. And I'll tell you why in a nutshell. I went to my first Toastmaster meeting last week. And I had never spoken on stage before. And, I volunteered. I don't know if you know how Toastmaster work. I volunteered for the second part to do the stand-up public speaking. And I did my little channeling thing in my head and asked for guidance to say the right words. And I think what I've delivered was pretty spectacular, even though I'd never done public speaking on stage in front of people.
It's a completely different skill. So congratulations on doing that and doing that successfully. Your Spiritual Lawyer book and your Intuitive Revolution in Business podcast feels like it marries up your day-to-day career already really nicely. What's true spirituality about then? Give us a flavor of that podcast.
Right. So it's called True Spirituality with Ange. And I think it comes from my passion to empower people in the world of spirituality to create or curate exactly the spiritual blueprint that resonates with them. And I come from the fact that I left the church. I was raised a Catholic. My dad was a devout Catholic. I left the church at about 12 years old, refused to confirm because there was too many things in the Catholic faith that made me uncomfortable. But once I did that, I was left in the wilderness because if you're not within an institutionalized religion, then you can rub shoulders with cults, but also with all sorts of people who say all sorts of things. And I sometimes say it's a spiritual jungle out there. And I believe it because I've come across so many interesting, but sometimes disturbing characters in that field. So with True Spirituality with Ange, I've looked at all sorts of topics. I have a guest every month and I debunk a lot of the myths, but also I aim to teach people how to use their intuition to trust their gut, whatever happens to them, to create that blueprint for themselves so they can make sense of their world, but without having to espouse someone else's vision of it.
Interesting. Yeah. You come away from the Catholic Church and that belief system, and that made you feel vulnerable to all of these other worlds and versions of spirituality or religion or whatever it is that's out there. And now you're teaching that or talking about that to other people through this podcast. So it's about spirituality just in your everyday life, your belief system and how you live your life.
Yeah. And I think the motivation for that one, so, there was the bombing in Paris for the whole intuition thing. And for the spirituality, what motivated me is that one of my very close friends was enrolled in a cult almost just after graduating from university. And it was such a painful 10 years to witness what happened to her and how she lost her identity into this cult. And she was completely sucked in. And she was a very intelligent, articulate person. And I want people to understand that it has nothing to do with intelligence, which is also why episode number 2 of that podcast is how to keep yourself safe when you explore your own spirituality, how to cult-proof your journey.
That's incredible. So right now you are as a spiritual lawyer. You've got a book on the horizon about spiritual law. You've got a podcast about intuition in business, which links with your career. You've got a podcast about true spirituality in your everyday world. And now you're going to hopefully be going into public speaking a lot more. So you're a busy bee, but you're giving back a lot. You're giving back a lot. It feels that you've drawn all of these experiences through your life. You've managed to find this fusion and this balance between your worlds. And now you want to teach that and give that back to people.
Yes, I think I would have done so much had I stayed a lawyer, but been able to reclaim all the other parts of me to come into what I was doing. And I want to give people permission to do that themselves. I know I was an amazing lawyer because of my intuition. But at the time, I didn't even know I was doing that because I was doing that so naturally and so fluidly. And I think a lot of people do that. I think artists know a lot more because they know about how to get in the zone. They understand more about that creative process. But I think lawyers need to do that as well. And CEOs and CFOs. The highest form of intelligence for me is what I call intuitive intelligence. It's when you can combine, as we said earlier, all of it. Because that's how geniuses make their inventions, I'm pretty sure Einstein found out all he did because of that, because he had the logical side and he had the intuitive side and he married them beautifully.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's incredible what you're doing, and it's really inspiring to see that identifying as a lawyer, but having all of this other stuff, you've got this creative outlet that you need to have, and you sort of managed to find your way probably by following your intuition to what you're doing now and marrying the two and being resourceful and making that a career as well as a passion. So it's really inspiring.
Thank you. I love what I do. There's not a day when I wake up when I'm not lit up by this new identity. We're circling back. I think adding the spiritual to the lawyer, it surprises people. It challenges people sometimes, but it makes a lot of sense for me.
Ange, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been so interesting to hear everything that you're doing and why you're doing it. Listening to what you used to be and your journey makes perfect sense about how that led you to today. So thank you so much for your time and for talking to me. Is there anything you want to say? Anything that you haven't said?
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me, but I also think this is where I don't think I was in my true full power until I reclaimed who I used to be. I had to make this integration because otherwise it was like I was split in two and one part of me was ashamed of the other and it just never worked. This is the reason I love your podcast so much, is that you're helping people do that integration that I did myself before I came on the podcast, obviously. But I think that through sharing those stories, people, I hope, will understand that nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever done in vain. There's no real mistakes. And there might be mistakes, but there's always a learning and it's always enriched. It's like a tapestry, which kind of ties in with the background that you put on your podcast as well, like richness of all these colors. And it's just fantastic. And I think you're doing an amazing, amazing job.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad that you get it, and I appreciate you. Thank you. Oh, it's so nice to hear people like Ange be so honest and open about the podcast and be a true fan and a true supporter. So first and foremost, I just want to thank Ange for coming on the episode and for also being an advocate for what I'm doing and really giving some fantastic feedback. I really do appreciate all of your positive support and positive energy. This episode really made me think about people who change their careers later on in life and the difficulty that can bring. We do identify so much of our personalities and our identity in the world with our jobs. And when that changes, whether we get made redundant, whether we decide that we want to change careers, whether what we're doing no longer serves us, however it is, that can have a really detrimental effect on our place in the world and the way that we see the world. And Ange spoke beautifully, really, about reconciling her old self and her new self and the struggles and the shame that she felt about being a lawyer. I've definitely felt that myself. When I was no longer dancing or identifying as a dancer, I felt a little bit of shame bringing that into the conversation with new colleagues and new worlds, and what I'm doing now for a job, talking about that and exploring what I used to do, because it's so different. And the people, my peers, my colleagues, the people that I'm working with, I just feel they just simply won't understand. It's taken me a long time to own all of those parts of myself. And Ange made me really think about and reflect on that. I, like many people out there, have my own beliefs of spirituality and my own versions of spirituality. And the beautiful thing about that is that everything about your own spirituality is really personal to you. I think what Ange does really well is to bring it all into a feeling, an inner feeling, a gut feeling, a feeling of intuition, and understanding and following our own intuition and how that can help benefit us in our lives. Hey, you. Yes, you, my lovely listener. Have you liked this podcast? Have you given us a star rating? And have you shared this podcast with a loved one? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, thank you. I appreciate you. Please keep doing that. If the answer is no, please go ahead and give us a star rating and spread the word about this podcast. I really do rely on you, the listeners, to spread the word and keep this podcast rolling down the hill. So please go ahead and share, like, and subscribe. I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon on another episode. Until then, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you very soon. Much love.